The Atari 2600 was released in September of 1977. The Atari was the first gaming system to use separate cartridges for each game, building on technology first developed for the Fairchild Channel F system in 1976. As the Wikipedia entry for the Fairchild Channel F describes it, the graphics are quite basic by modern standards. The Channel F is only able to use one plane of graphics and one of 4 background colors per line, only 3 plot colors to choose from: red, green, and blue, that turned into white if the background is set to black. A resolution of 128 by 64 with approximately 102 by 58 pixels visible and help from only 64 bytes of system RAM, half the amount of the Atari 26. The 2600 came with 2 joysticks and a single game: Combat. This was the introduction for an entire generation to the idea and the practice of home gaming. Until this time, gaming was a communal experience, something that a player went out into public to the mall to do. Now, gaming came home, and it came home in the form of Atari Combat. The Atari 2600 was released in America in September of 1977. Across the next 15 years, more than 500 games were released, with some coming directly from Atari and its partners/distributors and others coming from third-party gaming companies and, later on, homemade efforts by individual game programmers and small gaming companies. These games came in a wide variety of types, including arcade classics and sports, plus board games. It wasn't long, however, before horror-themed games began to appear, too. The first of these horror games may have been James Andreassen's 1982 hit Haunted House. According to its Wikipedia entry, Haunted House is a game in which the player, represented by a pair of eyes, must navigate the haunted mansion of the late Zachary Graves to recover the 3 pieces of an urn. The game has been identified as one of the earliest examples of the survival horror genre. The house has 3 floors and a basement. The player's character may pick up only one of 3 items at a time: a key to open doors, a scepter to ward off evil spirits, or the urn, and must avoid a bat, a tarantula, and the ghost of Mr. Graves himself. If the player is hit by the monsters 9 times, the game ends. If the player escapes the house with the urn, the player wins. Electronic Games in 1983 stated that Haunted House's graphics were on the simple side, but the effect of creeping through the darkened rooms is very well done. Other horror games followed, including movie-themed games like Data Age's Frankenstein's Monster in 1983 and Activision's Ghostbusters in 1985. Other games are largely unknown and don't even appear on most lists of Atari 2600 cartridges. One of these lesser-known games is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. As it is described by Moby Games at the Internet Archive, in this game, you are Leatherface. Some tourists have trespassed onto your land. They have been mostly eliminated but a few remain. The object is to chase down the remaining tourists and kill them. You chase the tourists with your chainsaw. When you get next to them, you press the fire button to rev up your saw and make cold cuts out of them. Try to avoid obstacles like hedges, fences, cow skulls and wheelchairs. Try not to rev the chainsaw unnecessarily as you only have 3 tanks of fuel, and when you're out of fuel, the game is over. If you run into fences, cow skulls or wheelchairs, you will be delayed a moment. If you run into hedge, you will need to use the chainsaw to remove them. The chainsaw idles all the time, so you don't want to be delayed. You get 1000 points for each tourist killed. You get a new fuel tank every 5000 points. When you run out of fuel, a tourist comes up behind you and kicks you in the pants. The same company that produced the Texas Chainsaw Massacre produced a second horror game for the Atari 2600, Halloween. As Angry Game Nerd described the game in October of 2008, John Carpenter's Halloween is well regarded as one of the most influential horror movies of all time. Released in 1978, the film unknowingly launched the career of Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis and arguably created its own genre, the slasher. The film's success also led to something much more evil. Halloween, the video game. Released by Wizard Video for the Atari 2600, the game featured horrifying acts of violence, all in glorious 8-bit graphics. Unfortunately, the game wasn't able to live up to the film's success. Both the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween are very rare, and collectors today will pay as much as $750 for each game. According to Ack and Racket Boy, Wizard Video is an example of a non-gaming company jumping on the Atari trend. Wizard was the distributor of both Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre on VHS. These Atari adaptations ended up being the first horror games in the industry. However, since these weren't aimed at the stereotypical younger demographic, they were typically kept behind the counter at the already small number of retailers that carried the game. Because they are both rare and they have a cool tie-in with pop culture horror franchises, they have become quite the collectible items. They are especially challenging to find complete in the box. Games that linked movies and horror on the Atari 2600 continued to be produced for decades and even included a 1992 release focused on George Romero's classic film Dawn of the Dead. This game is so rare, apparently, that actual gameplay does not appear anywhere online at the present time. All images and video used here come from either the Internet Archive or from YouTube. In the case of YouTube video, the channel name is clearly indicated on screen at the appropriate times. When not otherwise indicated, video comes from the Wayback Machine and is in the public domain. The same is true for all still images, not including those taken from Wikipedia to support quoted material. In addition to Wikipedia, Acker and Rocket Boy's review of Halloween is quoted, and material is quoted from the Internet Archive.